Shabbat Shalom. There once was a celebration for the Muslim festival of Nabi Musa. And this celebration consisted of a parade of sorts from Jerusalem to the theoretical tomb of Moses in Jericho. It's not really the tomb of Moses, but let's leave that aside. This parade began on Good Friday, and the pilgrims reached Jericho by Easter Sunday. And it took place for hundreds of years. And the fervor of the pilgrims meant that the journey was often just short of a riot. But the Ottomans' extremely strong hand enabled them to keep the event relatively peaceful. But when the Jordanians took control of the shrine in 1948, it ceased. That's why you may not know it. But until 1948, the pilgrimage of Nabi Musa was held, and in 1920, it was a particularly difficult year for the Nabi Musa pilgrimage. Early in March, a group of Arab Muslims attacked Tel Hai, a well-known outpost of the Jewish community in Palestine. A number of people were killed, including someone at the time very well known, a man named Joseph Trumpeldor, and 7 other members of the garrison that protected Tel Hai. Trumpeldor was a very significant figure in the Yishuv period, and he was an intimate of Zev Jabotinsky, and his death raised justifiable concerns among Jews. And the situation among Jews in Palestine deteriorated very quickly after this attack at Tel Hai, and the turn of events will sound all too familiar to you. Arabs in Jerusalem began randomly attacking Jews on the street. And as the festival of Nabi Musa drew near, there was reason to worry. And in fact, the pilgrimage of 1920, of the Nabi Musa pilgrimage, was essentially a protracted 3-day riot. Rosa Cohen was an accountant. And her rabbi father from Belarus was anti-Zionist, so much so that he educated her at a Catholic boarding school in Belarus. And when she was old enough on her own, she emigrated to Palestine in 1919. And she spent some time on a kibbutz in the Galil. And then she moved to Jerusalem, where she sought work as an accountant. And she had arrived in Jerusalem less than a year before the Nabi Musa riots. Concern for his fellow Jews led Nehemia Rubitsov to leave the Ukraine and join an organization called the Poalei Zion. It was a Marxist, pro-Zionist group of Jews. And as part of his activity in the Poalei Zion, he was sent to patrol the streets of Jerusalem to give protection to Jews who were under attack. And merely by accident, he bumped into Rosa Cohen. And they fell in love. And they got married. But Nehemia had already changed his surname to Rabin. And then just 2 years later, on March 1st, their son Yitzchak was born at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem. And shortly thereafter, they moved to Tel Aviv as a family, where they would live for the rest of their lives. Now, the background of Rabin's parents would be merely interesting, if not for the reality of the milieu of their courtship. Arabs rioting and randomly attacking Jews, that milieu being precisely the milieu we are experiencing now. And even that would only be coincidental, if not for the reality that in the intervening 95 years since their courtship, not too much has changed. And human nature, given what it is, that too might only be a footnote of history, if not for the work of their son Yitzchak, of blessed memory, whose legacy is now so inextricably tied to peace, or the lack of peace, between Jews and Arabs. It's a common turn of a phrase, legacy. Whose legacy is such and such? I myself use it in the most colloquial sense in eulogies, someone's legacy, just kind of the colloquial sense we all understand that word to mean. But in talking about a historical figure, the stature of Rabin, legacy is a much more squishy term. Legacies of political figures, civic leaders, and famous people are complicated stews of good and bad. Thomas Jefferson was obviously a giant in the creation of our own Constitution. It was equally obvious that he was a slave owner. To the best of my knowledge, fortunately, there's nothing so egregious in the life of Yitzchak Rabin. Yet, for the moment, to understand Israel, we must attempt to tease out that which is true about Rabin and unassailable about Rabin from that which is hagiographa. So it's true that Rabin was utterly devoted to the state of Israel. It's true that he was one of Israel's most significant military leaders. He was the chief of staff of the IDF during the Six-Day War. Pretty significant. He was also the Minister of Defense during the First Intifada. And he authorized not merely the use of force against Arabs, but he authorized a rather brutal use of force against Arabs that some believe set world opinion against Israel in an era when world opinion was not typically against Israel. Rabin had 2 terms as prime minister. And even after the great victory at Entebbe, I don't know if you are aware of this or recall this, but Rabin was the prime minister during the raid on Entebbe. It's kind of an interesting connection he has to Benjamin Netanyahu. But his first term ended rather sadly when it was revealed that he and his wife had 2 open American bank accounts left over from his time as ambassador in the United States. It seems almost silly now. There was a total of $10,000 in these 2 bank accounts that hadn't been used in years, and this scandal resulted in Rabin having to resign his position. It seems almost trite at this point. Scandal, $10,000 in a bank account that he didn't even remember about. But anyway, it was a long time ago. His second term was extraordinarily consequential because he led the negotiations along with Shimon Peres that resulted in the signing of the Oslo Agreement. Until the day he was killed, until the day he was assassinated, Rabin was a member of the Labor Party in Israel, and in fact, his parents, as I said, his father went to Israel as part of a Marxist Labor Party. His parents were radical left-wing members of the Labor Party in Israel. But Rabin could not be characterized as left-wing or really right-wing either. He was a realist. He was clear-eyed. He was absolutely without sentiment about the Palestinians. And above all, he wanted Jews in Israel to be safe. And he was prepared to give most anything to achieve that goal of Jews being safe. Now, horribly, of course, Yitzchak Rabin will be forever known as the only Israeli prime minister assassinated in office. As we know, Rabin was shot by Yigal Amir on November 4th, 1995 in Tel Aviv. And Yigal Amir is still alive. He's still in jail. And we know from his own narrative, the words he himself said, this isn't us guessing. We know that he assassinated Rabin because he made peace, so-called peace in Amir's head, the Oslo Agreement, peace, as evidenced through the Oslo Accord. And Amir considered Rabin a clear and present danger to the state of Israel, someone with the status, from the point of view of Jewish law, called a rodef, A rodef is someone who is pursuing you in a dangerous way. And according to Jewish law, and this is true, it's permissible to kill a rodef. A rodef would be, in our terms, someone is standing in front of you pointing a gun at you. That would be a rodef, and you are permitted to kill them, to save your own life. Amir saw Rabin as a rodef trying to kill the state of Israel, and therefore in Amir's world, in his mind, he had to kill Rabin to save Israel. And again, we know this not because I am guessing. We know this from Amir himself. I wish I could say that Amir was an outlier, that he was simmering in his own paranoia. I wish I could say that Amir kind of created his story from tohu vavohu, kind of eternal chaos. But I can't say that because it isn't true. As has been well documented in the past years, Amir was a product, and I know that people don't like it when I say this, he was a product of Jewish fundamentalists. And I call them Jewish fundamentalists because even though he's commonly called from the extreme right wing, I believe that that's an insult to the extreme right wing. He wasn't at any place on the political spectrum that makes sense to us, except to say he was part of a group of fundamentalists who understood the world in a particular way. And by the way, this too isn't my opinion. The story has been corroborated by members of the religious fanatical group, and they actually describe themselves as the religious right. But this story has been corroborated by members of this religious fanatical groups in Israel. No less a leader in Israel, a very, very traditional religious Orthodox Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who was the head of the Yeshivat Har Etzion in the West Bank. 2 weeks after Rabin was killed, he reflected upon Yigal Amir because someone asked him, if this boy came from the yeshivot that you are building, what do you say? And he said to his followers this: a day before the murder of Yitzchak Rabin, said Lichtenstein, we, our group, would have held up Yigal Amir as a shining example of our success and our source of communal pride, as if to say, look what we produced, isn't it great? But, he continued, Rabbi Lichtenstein, if we would have said that the day before, the day after we must also say, look what we produced, but this time with deep sadness. And to his credit, for the rest of his life, Rabbi Lichtenstein worked to subvent the kind of fanaticism that gave rise to Yigal Amir. What else can be said about Rabin that is true and unassailable? Well, aside from most of the details of his life, not a lot. No one can say for certain that Rabin would have made peace with the Palestinians, and Rabin himself was not given to great introspection and was not known as a prolific diarist. So we have little in the way of his own thoughts to guide us. Obviously, had he lived, we might have at least had a memoir to help illuminate what will now remain his largely inscrutable thoughts. So here we move to hagiography. Hagiography technically means a biography of a saint. But colloquially it means the narrative that grows up around a famous person that tells the story of the people who want it told in a particular way. So the hagiography of George Washington would be that he chopped down a cherry tree because it tells us some truth about George Washington. We don't really know that that actually happened. So the only thing you're hearing this week, from whomever you're hearing it from, is people who are guessing, essentially, about what they hoped Rabin would have done, would have said, where have gone, would not have done, would not have said. And they may well be right. And in the case of people like Dennis Ross, who wrote an article in the LA Times, He certainly knew Rabin. Of course I didn't know Yitzchak Rabin. But I'm going to offer this evening my own hagiography, my own narrative about Rabin. It's the one that I want. I'm not saying anything else other than that. It's my story. I, of course, think my story is correct. But it's always best, at least, if you tell stories that you believe at least, let alone that other people believe. So here goes. Those of us deeply involved in the Jewish world 20 years ago are to be forgiven if we thought for a brief moment that one positive outcome of Rabin's death would be that the far extreme fundamentalist right, whoever they are, in Israel would be shamed into silence, and that over time this group, which so clearly created the cancerous environment that allowed a guy like Amir to emerge, would wither. We are to be forgiven if for even a brief moment we allowed ourselves to believe that Amir's act of hate would lead to the death of the movement that spawned him. Yet, in a manner that essentially tramples on the memory of Rabin, Amir's act of vengeance had exactly the opposite effect. Since Rabin's death, fundamentalism in Israel, religious fundamentalism, has only grown stronger. And in fact, not only did Amir kill Rabin, but for all practical purposes, Amir also killed the Israeli progressive left, the Israel of Ben-Gurion, the Israel of Abba Eban, the Israel of Shimon Peres, and the Israel of Yitzchak Rabin, all themselves members of Israel's progressive left. In what is no doubt the very intended consequence of Yigal Amir himself, the death of the progressive left in Israel is also the death of a two-state solution. And while many other people are going to try to be very clear. From a Jewish point of view, the two-state solution is not the best solution because it offers Palestinian self-determination, but that's a laudable consequence. It's not the best solution because Israel is facing continued international approbation, because in all likelihood, even when there is a two-state solution, someone will figure out some reason to still hate Israel. It is not the best solution for any particular set of leftist progressive reasons, though those ideals might be met. A two-state solution is the best solution because in the long history of Jews living among Arabs, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Arabs and Muslims cannot tolerate Jews living among them. I'm sorry to say that, but there's a reason there's no more Jews in any Arab or Muslim country. And for that reason alone, the only future for a Jewish state is a state for Jews. A binational state will not achieve this, because in a binational, if you want to understand what a binational state will look like, that means Arabs, Palestinians, and Jews all living in the same state. You only have to look to what's going on in Israel right now and see what will happen, and it won't be pretty. So I believe, or at least I want to believe, that Rabin came to realize this, as Ariel Sharon himself came to realize this. I believe that whether in an epiphany or slowly throughout the days of the intifadas, the vision of what Israel must be came to Rabin, and once he saw it, as if from on high, the future of his people, the future of our people in the land, he did in fact become a rodef, a pursuer, but of a much different kind than Yigal Amir imagined. Rabin became a rodef shalom, a pursuer of peace. He sought peace with every fiber of his being, regardless of the political cost and regardless of the personal cost. And it is this very quality that is so lacking today in Israel. There is no one in Israel who is a rodef shalom. There is no one with the courage to pursue peace. Peace in the absence of anyone with whom to make it. Peace in spite of all the obstacles, in spite of the terror, and in spite of the wishes of your own people. And these are not merely my words. These are his words. And these are the words with which we shall close, the words he used to accept the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. We are in the midst of building the peace. The architects and engineers of this enterprise are engaged in their work, even as we gather here tonight, building peace layer by layer, brick by brick, beam by beam. The job is difficult, complex, trying. Mistakes could topple the whole structure and bring disaster down upon us. And so we are determined to do the job well, despite the toll of murderous terrorism, despite fanatic and scheming enemies. We will pursue the course of peace with determination and fortitude. We will not let up. We will not give in. Peace will triumph over all our enemies, because the alternative is grim for us all. And we will prevail. We will prevail because we regard the building of peace as a blessing for us, for our children after us. We regard it as a blessing for our neighbors on all sides, for all our partners in this enterprise, and for all mankind. Amen.